Very good morning to each one of you. On behalf of the Bangalore Chamber of Industry and Commerce, we welcome each one of you to this session on new paradigm in leadership sharing for the first time, the research-based finding during the pandemic. This session has been organized under the aegis of the Human Resource and Women Empowerment and Leadership Expert Committee of BCIC. We would like to especially thank Dr. Augustus, Chairman of the Expert Committee and HR Leader at IBM India, South Asia, and also Ms. Lavanya, co-chair of the Expert Committee BCIC and CFO of Zuwami for curating this session for the benefit of our members. The speaker for today's session is Mr. Thomas Wesley, leading expert in releasing potential of managers and leaders, REGENESIS, United Kingdom. The session will be moderated by Dr. Augustus, Chairman of the HR and Women Leadership Expert Committee of BCIC. On behalf of BCIC, we express our sincere thanks to Mr. Thomas for accepting our invitation to address on this important subject. We would also like to thank all the participants for joining in today's session. We request all of you to kindly mute your mic and webcam option. This will enhance and keep the bandwidth strong as well as avoid any disturbance in the background. Please post your questions in the chat box only. The speaker will respond to the question during the session. Or you could raise your hand and the speaker will be able to take up the call. May I now invite Dr. Augustus to set the context for today's subject and also moderate the session. Thanking you once again to all of you. Over to you, Dr. Augustus.
Thank you so much, Prithvi, for that brief introduction. And I'm truly delighted to be seeing so many familiar faces and names. And while I can't say hi to each one of you individually, but I want you to know that there are warm greetings from my heart and from Thomas on this wonderful Tuesday morning. And what better time to go and look at leadership, its styles, its influence, its impact, and to also look at what the research tells us, because we've gone into a post-pandemic initiative. And with that, I love knowledge of the festival of Diwali, you know, will inspire us to look at new ways of working, to look at various ways of skilling, and to look within ourselves to see whether we are skills, competencies that an ever-changing market and a dynamic marketplace requires of us. So with that, I had got in touch with Thomas Welsh. And Thomas Welsh has a very, very interesting profile. He has been researching a lot into leadership styles, management styles, and above all, he spent more than 35 years in consulting. And with that rich experience of consulting, which is across all sectors, IT to manufacturing to industrial sector, shipping, and so on and so forth. So all this wealth of knowledge that he has acquired during the last 3.5 decades or so are today available freely for people. And not a lot of folks are going to say, okay, take my life's work and see how it can help you. So Thomas has this wonderful initiative where he says, I'm not going to be charging, for a lot of this stuff. Some of it is definitely gratis, but my rich experience that I have should be shared. And that is something that stuck with me, because to me, knowledge is something that should be shared. Knowledge is pervasive. You can't put a lid on it. And this person typically is taking knowledge to all of us and ensuring that we all have the right leadership capabilities going forward. Now, without taking any more time, let me turn it back to Prithvi and Thomas. And the session is going to be interspersed with 2 videos. And as you are able to understand the concept and the research findings, there is also a session of Q&A at the end of each of these sessions. And you could also post your queries in the chat box. We'll try our best to answer them. And needless to say, there is some takeaways in terms of some wonderful content that Thomas would like to give away to us. So stay till the end and be the recipient of this great content that he has to share. So without much ado, Thomas.
Mr. Thomas, you have to unmute your mic.
Good morning to you all. Thank you very much for inviting me. I've been looking forward to this for some weeks, and I'm thrilled to be here. So I'd like to dive straight in with a little bit of chat from me before we start into the first video. And in particular, I'd like to ask a favor from you all, which is I'm always doing research. And one thing that would really help me is if you could put into the chat box your name and who you are in terms of what you do. And also to answer two questions, if you wouldn't mind. They're both quite intuitive. The one is, what do you feel globally is the ratio of managers and leaders to the population of the world? Is it 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 or 1 in 20? But I'd be really interested from this group to know what you see or what you feel is that ratio across the world. And the second question is, what do you see as managers and leaders' destiny in about 20 years' time? I think that would be really helpful to my ongoing research, particularly from this group. I'm hoping, just going to leave you a moment to do that, to get that into the chat box for me, if you would. Okay, so taking it on from there, hopefully you've all been able to reply to that, and we'll be doing so in the next few moments. But I'd like from today for three things to really emerge from this. I think there's been a huge tectonic shift in what's happening in management and leadership. So much so, it's really caught my attention, and particularly I feel through the last 2 or 3 years, things have been on the move a long way. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about that, and the video will show some light on this, how management and leadership is changing. And in particular, I think what's come to the fore is how managers and leaders now seem to have 3 big requests. 87%, and this figure I find quite startling, say they want to share best advice with other managers and leaders. And that, in my experience, is new, because I think for many, many years, management and leadership has been a rather solo profession, and people have rather prided themselves on being able to go it alone and find the way forward. But that has completely shifted. And I think a possible reason for that is highlighted in a book by Roy H. Williams. The book is called Pendulum, and it mirrors the book that was written some years ago called Spiral Dynamics, if any of you have read that. And it talks about the memes in society moving from essentially an I meme, in other words, oriented towards the self and what I want, and a we meme, which is taking responsibility for playing my part in society. And what's happened very recently, according to the book by Roy H. Williams, is that that meme has switched back from I to we. And maybe what we're seeing here is that coming through to really be manifest, particularly after the pandemic, that there are some things in the world that we need to pay attention to. I think underneath all of this, we followed through with interviews following the surveys. We've discovered that there is also another shift taking place, which is wanting to be involved, wanting to participate. And we'll speak to this more a little bit later. And that has really brought things to a head where there is a really common view, which is that I don't know that I can rely on just the few who are politicians and the very few who are the most top leaders in the world to guide us forward, going forward. And I would like to play more of a part in shaping the destiny of management and leadership, but also to play a part in taking more responsibility and giving more perhaps to the world around us, maybe through our employees, maybe through our organization. So those are really big themes that have come through from this. And then in all of this, we are all beginning to feel the pressure now, post the last 2 years, of how to sustain business. How do we realize more of the potential that we have to add value to the world, to create wealth in the world? My version of what the purpose of business is actually to create wealth, but not in the narrow term that perhaps we tend to mean today around money, but in the widest terms of quality of life, quality of environment, quality of health, and general enjoyment of life. What I'm hoping you'll get from the video, which I'm going to show in just a few moments, is to talk a little bit about REGENESIS. This is something I've had as something of a personal mission all my life. And so the video says a little bit about where it's come from, what it is, what it does, why I believe it matters, and we'll talk more about this in the Q&A, ways in which managers and their organizations can benefit from it, and how they can use it and how it works. Really, I've spent a lot of time collecting a lot of really great information from thousands of managers and leaders. And now I think I'm in a position where I'd like to give this back. I'd like to have spent the time and effort, which I have, pulling this together, and provide it back to the world in a way that can perhaps be best used in the near term. I would ask that you respect what you're going to hear and become fellow custodians of it, not because I'm trying to restrict or be precious about the content, but my mission has always been to make what I've gathered affordably available to every manager and leader, ideally, in the world. And the essence of REGENESIS is always to collaborate with other organizations and other people to serve that mission, really, and to spread the information around. So the reason for my request is really to retain its integrity. At this stage, I feel like the custodian of a lot of people's knowledge, and I would ask you to join me in that so that we can sustain the integrity of the core information that we've got. It's not that there won't be more new information added to it as we work together, but that's the essence I would make as a little request to you. And finally, I'd like to say a little bit about care with which REGENESIS is now building a network to get this piece of work done, to spread this information around managers and leaders as far as possible. And I've come here as the first big stop I've made, deliberately, because I feel India is a unique country. It is the place in my mind, in my psyche, in my emotions, where technology is truly booming, but it's having to sit side by side alongside humanity. And I think that's an important combination. And I think that causes lots of very sensible views that I've been lucky enough to hear by participating in various conferences and various conversations that I've been involved with so far. And I'm always very impressed by how altruistic the management culture seems to be in India. So I've come here with my heart in my hand and my life's work in my hand to say, okay, let's see if we can work together in some way and to see how we can build a network in India that can perhaps spread elsewhere and see how we can benefit the world. So I probably warbled enough for the moment. What I'd like to do now is show you the first of two PowerPoints that I've made. This one is actually in the video. The second one I will do live. So I'm going to switch that over now so that hopefully the technology will work and we can see this. Okay. So hopefully this will play. Could somebody confirm that you can hear this and see this, please?
Okay.
It's clear, sir.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Welcome to REGENESIS, Building the Future. This is a name we've chosen very carefully, and one we'd like to offer you a bit of a definition for before we begin. We, probably from the French, to see again. Regen, usually meaning rebirth or renewal, and REGENESIS, the fact or process being formed again for the third time. Right now, after the last few years, we feel the tectonic plates are moving underneath management teams, and this image probably represents best of all what we're hoping to achieve. Our quest, or my quest, well, 39 years ago I had one question. It was a big question, and it was why. Why do a tiny fraction of managers and leaders and organizations outperform their peers by tens, hundreds, or thousands of percent? The journey? Well, it's taken me 39 years. I've worked with 8,437 managers and leaders. It's undoubtedly more than that. They're the ones I have records for. 117 boards and thousands of organizations. The discovery? The answer is powerful beyond measure, and all importantly repeatable. Top performers do certain key actions differently. Each certain key action puts them ahead. A combination of these key actions puts them way ahead. And over the years, these have acquired the name masterpiece. These key actions have become the masterpiece. Hello, I'm Thomas Buss. Over the last 39 years, I've done everything I can to become as expert as possible in releasing the potential of managers and leaders. And with the help of many, many excellent colleagues, done everything we can to organise these into 12. This will give the name REGENESIS. More recently, in the last 2 years, I've done 3 surveys. It started out as one, which was the chaotic time survey, but we had so many questions we followed that up with a crisis to opportunity survey, and then out of crisis survey. And from that, we've been really shocked by the results. There's 3 big requests that managers and leaders make. 87% want a way to share best advice with other managers and leaders. It's as though we can no longer look to those above us entirely to make the best decisions to take us forward into the future. They want more and more to play a part in shaping the destiny of where we're going. 78% want to assign resources and put skin in the game to make improvements, for sure, for their own organisations, but also for themselves. But more importantly, we're beginning to see that they also want to make a difference in the world. And 61% want group mentoring with peers who inspire them and hold them to account as the way of doing those 2 things. Following the surveys, we've also done many interviews with managers and leaders, and we've been really surprised how 3 most wanted outcomes come to the fore. More life and a better life for them as managers and leaders and their families, whatever that is for them. More success and maximum improvement for their organisations and their people. And more importantly, a greater contribution to a better world for everyone for the future. And how this comes through in conversation is they feel they can no longer rely upon the politicians and the very few top people at the top of businesses and society to guide us forward into the future. And they feel they want to play a much more active part in guiding them the way forward. Why have we chosen to work all this time with managers and leaders? Well, from the very beginning, the way I learned it was the purpose of business was to create wealth, not just in terms of money alone, but in its widest sense of health, quality of life, quality of environment, quality of climate, and enjoyment, and all the things that we all look for in life. Why management can make the world a better place? Well, it is central to our role to raise productivity and well-being, and this in turn leads to greater GDP per capita, a key measure of that wealth in its widest terms. And we're beginning to see that productivity across different countries is huge. At the 90th percentile, it's 4 to 5 times greater than at the 10th percentile. And I'm always inspired by this graph because it shows the difference in productivity across nations. And it reminds us of the importance of joining hands across nations. And personally, I think that the real opportunity is for the countries lower down the curve. The top of the curve countries have probably got their systems developed as well, or nearly as well as they are able. But clearly something is not quite right. The pandemic has showed us that there are many stresses and strains in the system, which perhaps need a big look at. And I think the countries on the lower part of the curve are at the building stage, and they've got the opportunity to create and conceive of things that are new and fresh for the world and can really help us move forward in a better way. The other thing that's come through so strongly from managers and leaders is their wish now to actively participate. They're not willing to sit there as passive dischargers of decisions from above. What we're hearing is only I can know what to do in my particular role, in my particular organisation, in my particular situation. Only I can work with my particular colleagues, customers and seniors. It's no good taking directives from outside and trying to implement them locally. They don't fly. What I want is help, where I work, to achieve my goals, my organisation's goals, using my real information in a safe way. So, how do we at REGENESIS respond? Well, we decided to build the mastermind network all the managers and leaders have requested, and respectfully return to them their discoveries that we've collected over the years. And the reason for this is to stimulate your and their thoughts and action leadership so that you can take the ball forward. So, what's on your mind? Well, from the majority of people that we've talked to, there's three big things. The master goals of you as an individual, and for many people, the majority, the vast majority, over 90%, they're not fully formed yet, and most people need a little bit of stimulus to actually think that through to a fuller level, so that they can properly lead themselves and then lead other people. Then there's the master goals of your organisation, and once again, for the majority of organisations, these are not very well articulated. And lastly, as the group matures, as the mastermind group matures, often its interest starts to go beyond their roles, and they begin to think about how they might intervene in the wider world as things move forward and benefit other people. So from this, we've taken it as our role to provide as many managers and leaders as possible with as much help as we can. And we've created the REGENESIS Mastermind Network. This provides participants with, firstly, up to 12 peer mentors who work with you for up to 2 hours every month in an expertly facilitated mastermind group, delivered online, right where you work. The value of this from our previous work, probably £800 a month. Then those same people break into pairs or threes or fives, who then collaborate and assist each other in delivering actions they've each identified. The value of this, probably £300 a month with the support it needs. The Master Map and Master Key Professional Library. The purpose of this is to stimulate peak performance in key strategic areas. This includes all the REGENESIS insights, tools and strategies we've gathered over the last 39 years, working with 8,437 more managers and leaders, thousands of organisations and hundreds of boards. The Master Maps. Here's a list of the Master Maps. I won't go into the detail now for obvious reasons. These cover all the major strategic areas of people, and processes and growth and the functioning of an organisation when it's at its very best. The Master Map and Master Key Professional Library. This is our contribution. All the material is donated by REGENESIS for the exclusive use in the REGENESIS Peer Mastermind Network. The value, well, previous clients have paid more than $150,000 a year for this content. Diagnostic and needs analysis to identify next actions you need to develop and grow yourself as a manager and leader, your organisation and your board. Value, certainly greater than $3,650. The Mastermind Mentoring Manual gives full explanation of the 12 masterminds to simulate your creative thought and action leadership, supplied in 12 instalments. Average value, $650. Unlimited email support and phone and Zoom extras where needed, value at least $250. And the REGENESIS Mastermind Network as a member, as a master practitioner, or a master mentor. And the value of that, at least $450. In terms of building the future, we feel we are now duty bound to provide this library material and support systems, as listed above, to everybody in the network. Its value at least $170,000 a year. Releasing these resources is our contribution to the future success of managers and leaders and their organisations. So what about the return on investment for participants and their organisations? Well, this is just an example of one question in one master key on one master map. And the question was a very simple one. What is the most important change or improvement you could make in your work area? We asked this of a group of 87 managers whose average salary was $35,000 a year. And as you can see, having discounted the confidence levels and the cost of the training and the time spent in the mentoring, not due to surgery.
Consulate appointments are available and all of that as well. So that's written there.
It's actually over £65,000 a year, which is remarkable for just one question. So, on that thought, I'd like to say we're about building the REGENESIS Mastermind Network. Now I think it's time to open the floor for questions and discussion. So please ask anything you'd like to check understanding of the things that I've said. And then I'd like to address these three big questions. How would you like to set this up in India? 2, do you want mastermind groups set up in your organization, across a group of collaborating organizations, or with managers and leaders anywhere? In other words, join the open group system that we started to move across the world. And 3, what investment per person per month is appropriate for working here in India? I would like your view on that, and what you think is a reasonable contribution to the overheads that we, of course, will incur. And the way ahead? Well, there's an exciting journey ahead. I'm really looking forward to working with you. I'm Thomas Ralph. See you soon. Thomas. Hello and welcome back. Quite a lot of information in the video, and I'd really like to just open the floor to questions to see what you made of that. I didn't wish that to come across as pushing for any particular solution. The questions at the end are really just to open the conversation about things that I'd like to understand and know about, and I wasn't quite sure how to position all of that. So I put it in those 3 big questions. We'll be talking more about them later when we perhaps get closer to understanding what you all feel might be the way forward to commence some kind of network activity in India. So can I open the floor to others and see who comes forward with questions?
Thomas, Augie here. Thanks for that brilliant presentation. I saw that particular chart which says the master maps, and it has various areas there, intuition and so on and so forth. I couldn't grasp all of them, but I think there were at least 10 behaviors, competencies, etc. Would you like to share a little bit more on that particular chart with us?
Sure. There's 2 ways I can do that. I can either talk to this or I can show some examples of the master maps in another program on my PC here, if that would help.
Sure, I think talking through it would be great.
Okay, the maps are basically organized into 3 big groups. The first of the maps, the first 4, are all about people. And what we found in working with managers and leaders is they're not what we call them. We ask them, are you fully intentionalized? Have you got your life and career goals sufficiently clear that you are truly leading yourself? Is each day that you live aligned to the life of choice that you would have chosen to give of your best during your life? And the usual answer from virtually all people that we work with is not quite, or not at all. And what we find is about 3% of managers and leaders, in fact 3% of people, have clear written life and career goals. And that first map begins to help them sort that out. And it's usually the very first thing we do with individuals that come into the network. And in fact, they do it before they enter the mastermind group in normal times. The second map, also in a people sequence, is something else that's not usually done to a very high degree, which is team building inside the organization that that particular manager and leader leads. So it might be an organization, it might be a department, it might be a team. It's often not done sufficiently so that people are able to answer 3 big questions. And these are: 1, how does what you do contribute to the wider goals of the organization? The most common response is simply, what wider goals? Or I don't know, because the dots aren't quite joined. And without that, it's logically impossible for that team or that department, or even sometimes a whole organization, to give of its best. So a very simple process that takes the team to identify its own mission, if you like, its fundamental purpose, its vision for the future as it might like to see itself in contributing to the max in their organization, and what we call the vital few, which is the key areas for action to bring all of that about, and values. That is often an early piece of work that is done. So the three questions I mentioned, the first is how does what you do contribute to the wider goals? The second question is how does what you do fit alongside what other people are doing to contribute to the wider goals? Much more complicated question. And the third question that we use to quickly diagnose an organization is to ask managers and leaders themselves, which is how does what you do help people at the sharp end do their job better? And often the answers to those three questions will quickly indicate that there's something missing in the jigsaw puzzle of communication that allows people to contribute to the max. So that's the second master map, is it sorts those kinds of questions out for people in the team. The third map is to do with are your people fully individualized? In other words, are they leading themselves? Are they contributing as well as they could be to the team purpose, the team vision, and some sorting out around how that can be actioned is often very, very useful. And then the fourth map is then, are people what we call energized? Are they energized enough to go and get any improvements or changes or benefits that are available in their work area and bring that forward as a kind of micro project that also can have really high value? And that question in the video on the evaluation, which was, excuse me, would you mind if I ask you what's the most important change or improvement in your work area, is pretty universal. You can ask that of pretty much anybody, and if you give them time to think, you'll get some really great answers. And what we uncover with these first four maps is there's huge untapped potential just in those four areas. The second four maps are all about clarity of process and systems, and they often you find that the processes running in an organization are not as good as they could be. There's not an understanding of how money attaches to activity, and that can often be a significant blockage. There's often a gap between what is said and what is done. In other words, the way transactions are handled in words is at odds with what is wanted in terms of outcomes of the organization. And the last area is all about thinking through how all of this fits together in a more kind of coherent package in terms of processes. The last four are all about really getting ready for growth. And when you get to the last four, the possibilities for significant or profound ideas about where an organization or a team or whatever it is the unit that we're looking at through the management lens of that particular individual can really grow. So that's what the master maps are all about. They're the three domains. And obviously with more time I could go into much more detail, which is why we spread these out usually over a 12-month period and introduce them, not because we know the answers, because what we've got is the collective wisdom of many. These maps are simply the best way we and they have found over the 39 years for doing certain particular things, and they draw attention to key areas where usually great benefit can be found for an organization. So does that answer the question you were intending, Augie?
Oh, yes, thank you. That's a great depth perspective. So let's open it to questions from our friends on the call.
I think questions could well be going into the chat box, and for whatever reason I can't see that.
Neither can I. Rupa, are you able to view the chat box and read it out if there are any questions?
There are few questions from the participants that asking, can you explain more about the mastermind program? Is it about mentoring managers or leadership of the organization?
Okay, my work has focused all around releasing the potential of managers and leaders. I've been a consultant and professional facilitator for most of my working life. And what my early research uncovered is people struggle with either part or most of the aspects of their role when they're managers and leaders in some way. There might be a small way that doesn't really affect performance, or it could be in some more significant way that is really impairing their ability to mobilize their people, their resources, their financial assets, and maybe their environmental assets in a way that really is optimized. And so they need help with all of that. Once they start to work together, which I suppose is the early version of mastermind groups, they begin to unlock some of these problems. I've had the good fortune to work with Professor Reg Revens, who was the father of action learning in the UK. I don't know to what extent that was visible in India, but he used to call these mentoring groups comrades in adversity. And it was managers and leaders all struggling to do their best with some difficulty. And he just put them in groups, enabled them to talk, and wonderful things began to happen. They began to really unlock some very difficult problems that they were hitherto facing, and for which they found great resolutions. So does that, to some extent, answer the question from the individual who raised it?
Thank you. There is one more question. How is it different from Hoshin Kanri training?
Different from, I missed the last bit, the signal dipped just as you were speaking, Rupam.
How is it different from Hoshin Kanri training?
I'm not getting, it's something training, something training. I'm not hearing that clearly.
It is Hoshin Kanri training.
Hoshin Kanri training. I don't think I'm familiar with that type of training. I can only talk to what we've been doing, which is there's a huge track record of success of people putting managers and leaders at all levels into mentoring groups with a facilitator, but essentially you put people together to do the things that are requested by the research that we've been doing. First of all, it gives people the opportunity to share ideas, and often ideas from one sector will have a novel and profound application in another sector. You know, people adopt and adapt the ideas to suit their own situation. But one of the key pieces of learning that we've got is sometimes a sector can get quite stuck, held back in its ability to innovate and be creative, because it starts to become self-contained. And these mixed mentoring groups often open the doors to many new ideas and many new ways of doing things that allow new solutions to come to the fore. What we've also learned is that if you just leave the group to its own devices, it on its own will be limited, because it's missing out on the, if you like, the distilled wisdom that you would get from a really good consultancy outfit. But for many organizations, particularly smaller organizations, it's not realistic for them to bring in a high-powered consultant at substantial fees. And I think one of the things that we now feel is, having had the benefit of working with these managers and leaders, thousands of managers and leaders all our lives, we're at a point now, particularly at this moment in time, where we need to enable these groups much more and give them back all the stuff that we've acquired over the 39 years. And by chunking that into 12 areas that we and the people we've worked with have identified as key areas of activity, of existing activity, that is possible to do in a much better way in many cases. The top performers, as we've followed them around the different sectors and the different parts of the world have always been people who found a great solution to a regular problem, and that in itself puts them way ahead. I remember visiting a company, and they were a manufacturing unit for the dyes and molds that is used in the plastic industry, and they made the steel formers that created many of the pieces of packaging that we get in supermarkets and those sorts of places. And they were 4 times larger than the average for their sector. And the whole thing that they did really excellently was, one, they engaged every one of their employees in the dialogue about quality. And the other part of it was they had taken quality of everything as central to their way of working. And they continuously reviewed and looked at every aspect of their business through a quality lens to see if they could make it better, help work become more harmonious for the employees, help the machines improve, help the way the work would flow through the factory that they had, how that improved. And it was clear that their essence was best described by this differentiator, and was clearly why they were so much bigger than their peers and competitors in their sector. So let me stop there. Are there any other questions, Rupert?
Yes, a few more questions are there.
Yep.
Here, what is your view for especially India? Do you see the data about the managers will be similar, or any specific points that are different?
In India, I find the people I talk to are either really plugged in to the future, really well informed, really well trained, and really that's why I've come to BCIC today, because I wanted to get at that group, and I wanted to say I think we're facing an opportunity, which is to start a network, to build a network, not for the very best, although I suspect even the very best benefit from working together, in my experience, but it's then to network with the other managers and leaders who are out there doing the work every day, perhaps have lots of ideas but don't know how to implement them, have an energy that is yet to be tapped into to bring a lot more to the table. We're getting a very strong message through the 3 surveys that we've done and the interviews that we're doing to follow up, that the wish to participate is almost overwhelming. They wish to be more involved. They wish to have more conversations that can make a difference. And in that regard, I think it's quite like most countries. But what makes it significantly different is there's also a humanitarian theme that comes through everywhere with every person I talk to, which is a concern to bring more people into the economic miracle that's going on in India, and to move forward to the future with exciting things like AI and automation and digitization, but to do that in a way that gives benefit to humankind and people in general, and avoids some of the pitfalls. And I just feel in the conversations that I have that the building for the future theme is very strong in India, wherever I go, and as is care for the decisions about powerful technologies, that is also present to a much higher degree than I find anywhere else. And perhaps because of the level of startups and the level of tech businesses, startups that are going on in India, but there is that much greater focus on the need to be careful with this, because we're entering the critical phase now where big decisions will be made about powerful things that could shape societies, could shape humanity even.
Yeah, thank you. The next question is, any prerequisites for joining your mastermind group, please?
I think the only one would be to be a manager and leader. And in this setting, really what I'm looking for is people's thoughts and guidance about how to price this. We're willing to put all this material, if you feel like this is our, I feel now duty bound, having spent a life working with all of this, to give it back. And it feels like now is the time. The surveys are telling us quite clearly that it's urgent. What we've seen as a result of the last couple of years is much that we thought was quite functional actually is quite dysfunctional. We've got some emerging problems which are frightening, and unless we can sort them out quite quickly, we're going to be in trouble. And it's not just in one country, it's all over the world. The countries have got a similar set of challenges that are as a result perhaps of the way we've run our organizations in the past. As we've grown, we've tended to centralize. As we've tended to centralize, we've extended supply lines, and some of that looks a bit risky just now, and some of that seems to be doing some harm just now. So we need much better solutions, and quite quickly. I'm aware that this week in the UK, although I'm not there, I am aware that in Glasgow we've got COP26 just taking place, and India has just volunteered its own climate plan and climate goals, which I think has been a real eye-opener and a turnaround for the rest of the world, because now all the major countries of the world are fully on board with reducing the carbon footprint and hopefully limiting global warming, for example. I'm not saying that's the only issue, it's just one of many issues. And as I said earlier, there is a growing feeling that we can't look to our politicians entirely, or the very few top leaders of the massive corporations, to take us forward. They're subject to so many pressures and so many other interests, it's very difficult for them to see the way ahead. So the view is, let's bring the decision making down the layer, let's be more proactive at the layer below, which is in fact managers and leaders. And why I asked you about the ratio, what you thought was the ratio of managers and leaders in the world, there are certainly millions of managers and leaders, as you can perfectly well understand. But even if the ratio is 1 to 10, then that makes about 750 million managers in the world. Now, that many people as a body in a common role, which is there to create wealth, to make decisions every day that affect our human resource deployment, our financial resource deployment, our material resource deployment, and our environmental resources and how they're used, that's happening every day. So if we can do something to make that better, it could well be we can get hold of lots of the decisions. And if we can form a sensible, intelligent network around organizations like BCIC, then hopefully we can start to find areas where we as managers and leaders can intervene. So the only qualification to join the group is, are you a manager and leader of any kind? And does this feel like the right thing for you to do? If so, then contact me and we'll start that conversation and figure out how to take you forward. But more importantly, in this setting, what I'd be looking for is who are the people that are willing to come on board with this and become hubs for mastermind network groups to start their managers with this, because the whole emphasis is to provide gain for the individual, gain for the organization, and hopefully out of that comes a better world. And we'll provide everything that we've learned to every individual in that network as best we are able. We'll always be subject to feedback, I'm sure, but that is our mission going forward.
Thank you. The next question is, we have heard about teal organization through reinventing organization by Frederick. What's your view on this, and does mastermind program aid in moving towards such teal organizations?
I'm missing one word there. Something, teary organizations?
Teal. T-E-A-L, teal organizations.
Team organizations. Yes, this definitely helps team organizations. It's after sorting out the, are you personally as the manager and leader, are you clear about where you're going? Are you leading yourself? The very next question is always, is your team have they done the work? I call the work, the name that's grown up over the years is organization development team building. This isn't going on maybe a major kayaking expedition or climbing a mountain. This is actually doing a piece of logical thinking work about the mission for the organization, what's its fundamental purpose, what's its vision for the next probably 5 to 10 years, how do we want our organization to be in 5 to 10 years time, whether that's a team or a larger organization, because just as the first question for managers or any employee is, how does what you do contribute to the wider goals? The first question for a team needs to be the same. What's your vision for you at maximum contribution to your organization? And that is a team question. And then after that, so it's my shorthand is always mission, vision, values, vital few, and action plans. And unless that's done, unless that piece of thinking work is done, then that team it's logically impossible for it to maximize its contribution, because it can't understand collectively how they're all working together or how it fits into the bigger machine. And there's a distinct process which we give away as part of the information in the master maps. And the master maps themselves, you'll see they're just 12 one-page documents. And the reason they're one-page documents is taken years to design them all. But once you understand what it's doing, all you need is the memory prompt. And so each of these is a memory prompt. And if you look at the map, it should quickly remind you exactly what might need attention. Obviously, you'll put your own flavor on it and suit it to your situation. But that's the way it's all designed. So it's a quick memory prompt, but you've had a year's gradual training where every month you'll get a new master map, you get some support materials that help you understand what the detail looks like, and there's depth of materials under that. Each one has a book behind it if you want it. Each one has a lighter summary in terms of a mentoring manual, and you can come back even more to a video summary. And for many experienced managers, that's enough. That's all they need. It's just a reminder and a prompt to go and look at this area in their organization and see if it's working as well as it could be. And is there anything that needs attention? And it allows people to quickly zero in and maybe initiate some kind of improvement project or change project that quickly fixes something they can see has a better way of being done. So if I stop there, how are we doing? Any other questions?
Yes, there's one more question. How would you go about working with heterogeneous group with people from different, sometimes competing goals?
I think difference is really good because I think a lot of learning comes from very different worldviews. In the mastermind groups, we go for a group of 12 because that's about the right number of people to get really good interaction. It provides enough resource in the group to have a rich difference of approaches. And ultimately, we also need to test, is that particular group working? If they're really different individuals, different managers and leaders from incompatible sectors, well, that becomes visible, and we simply remix the group. And anybody can say, this group isn't working for me, and what we'll try and do is reassign to another group. And that's just part of the admin function of running the groups. So that's how we handle that kind of difference. But usually, if at the beginning of a new group, there are differences or a lack of understanding between individuals, as the months tick by, as long as they're not really uncomfortable, there's usually great learning from people who have very different viewpoints and different worldviews. And I find that very, very helpful and very stimulating, and so do most of the participants. And similarly, we found there's great richness to work with a very senior person in a group and a very junior person, because there's a great deal to be understood across the range of seniority. Similarly, there's a great deal to be learned across different cultures. And you know, the true meaning of diversity is having a richness of ideas because the sources are diverse. And so I think all of that adds to the richness of this. And my experience of working with people in India is they always have a rich and diverse view to bring to things that I personally thoroughly enjoy, and I know other people do too. So I hope that answers that question too.
Thank you, Mr. Welsh. Over to you, Augustus.
I think those were some very interesting questions out there. Thank you so much for elucidating that, Thomas. And as we go into the next part of this discussion, I just want us to also touch on a couple things, right, which is on top of our minds just now. Of course, you mentioned the climate summit that's happening out there in Glasgow. But alongside that, we are seeing what is called the Great Resignation. Okay, close to 42% of people surveyed want a switch in their jobs. Okay, yes. And therefore, what drives that, we know very clearly, is that people, after 18 months of working remote, want to go and try out certain things new.
Yes.
And the other point related to that is that we are now learning to manage by compassion, by empathy,
yes.
Right? And at some point, we would like to hear from you around the current situation, and especially managing by empathy and compassion. Thank you.
In terms of this is one of the messages that has come through very strongly in the surveys. The need to, we've heard it from all over the world actually, people are realizing, having spent time at home, many managers and leaders, I find, and now talking to me on Zoom with their son and or daughter maybe in the room, and that's become the new normal. And I can see, and they have talked about how much better it is for their families that they spend more time at home, even though they're working, they're physically present in their family environment, and their children definitely benefit from that. My son is one of those people. His two daughters have benefited immensely. So understanding that if that way of working works, then I think it's very important to bring that forward, because the health of nations, the health of families, is the building block of the health of nations. And certainly over here in the West, the mental health aspects, the emotional health aspects have been causing some concern for some time. And I suspect some of that is due to the way we've structured our work, so that many managers often will talk about having had a great career, but can't remember who their family are really. Or yes, they were physically there, but emotionally they were absent because their minds were still busy at work, even when they were at home in the evening, even on weekends. And many people just work very long hours. So understanding much more of that is very, very important. And I think people need a lot more unconditional positive regard built into the workplace. We'll see in the next batch of slides I've got, there will always be some who struggle to contribute, some who struggle to get it right, and that's okay. And we should allow for that in our planning. But there are many in the middle, from the excellent, the top achievers, to the bottom, to the people who find it very difficult to achieve and contribute. There are many who are in a position of choice, and with the right emotional support from their manager and leader, their lives can be transformed. And in fact, that's what the first four maps are about, is saying to managers and leaders, not only have you a directorial role where you lay out your expectations, even demands as to what a person might do, you might also like to contemplate having much more of a pastoral role. Here is a human being who might work for your organization for 40 years, for most of their waking hours in their life, and I think it's incumbent upon us, we're beholden to take care of that individual and help them become all that they're capable of being. And that takes quite a lot of maturity and emotional understanding. And it often is guided by doing the work on myself first, because as I say, over 90% of people that we work with actually need to do some fairly significant work to their own life and career goals, to their own health of self. And the first master map is very much about that. And once they've got it sorted for themselves, they then go, aha, I now see that I need to do this with every one of my employees. And that's often a good way to start that piece of work. So the next couple of master maps, it starts with a team, but then you immediately drop down to the individuals. How do I help you be all that you're capable of being, both at home and at work? So yes, definitely, that's such a central theme for the future and going forward. And organizations that use those first four master maps quickly get much more, it works in all ways. You get better relationships, you get better output, you know, everything that could be improved around people working together starts from that kind of basis. You have to start with the person.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Thomas. So we'll let you go through the rest of the program.
Okay, I've got another presentation to share with you here, and hopefully I can see that. There we go, lovely. And this one I've thought it would be easier to do live. Okay, so this is, oh no, let's move that one forward. That's the one I want, that's much better. So if this is of interest, and I'm really seeking your guidance and following this session, I'm seeking connections with more of the people who have very kindly and interestedly showed up here to listen to what I've got to say. And I'd like to have some conversations that follow through, really, around how could I bring this. I want to do something to help India. It's just such an excellent, innovative, growingly prosperous place. It's not for that reason. I want to do something because I feel it's vitally important. And this is something, not something that's occurred just recently. It's something I've carried for many years. I've had in many ways an intuitive kind of life. But I notice when people speak to me, and over the years I've had lots of people, lots of Indian people say to me at various times in all sorts of different locations, you should go to India. And it is now very firmly in my diary. As soon as travel eases up, I'm going to be coming over. I have now many friends in India. So actually building a network that makes a difference to what you're already doing would be a nirvana for me, a heaven for me. So this is some thoughts about moving that forward. So if I was approaching industry and commerce and or public service organizations or any type of organizations, these are the things I would take as the core understandings that perhaps we might share. There is, I believe, a need for workplace mentoring for managers and leaders, and that specifically needs to work on improved reputation. And in fact, the subject we've just been talking about, reputation with my own team members, is built largely by how I relate to them and how I manage and lead them. Do I give them as much enablement as I could? If I did, I'd very likely see a much bigger dividend in terms of better results and ultimately better rewards for them and me and a better life. I, as a manager and leader, if I can crack that, if I can understand how to do that skillfully and well, I not only benefit myself, but I also benefit the people around me. So that is the first understanding we have. The second one is about current opportunities for managers and leaders. They are hungry for a mechanism to share ideas and co-mentor each other, collaborate on things, but it's useful if they can be non-competing. And there are models of this all over the world. They're usually very expensive to buy into, but they are there and they do work. And the lack of that seems to be preventing improved contribution and growth for organizations. We'll see from a couple of graphs I got later on that organizations often are very much underperforming their potential. And the third most wanted outcome is increasingly this contribution to a better world. And I suspect this great resignation is because the itch to lead a better life, to make better contribution, has got beyond scratching, and it's now demanding that I do something. I don't know what it is, so I'm just going to stop what I'm doing and try and figure out how to start what I think I need to do. So you can see what people are silently begging to be led in many respects. They want some help to figure out what they need to do, and it's not that I'm offering to lead them. What I'm offering is to help them. I think these networks really help uncover where I need to be going, what I need to be doing, and stimulate that thought and action leadership that managers and leaders need to exhibit in order to move forward. Interesting. I think we missed a slide there. No, we didn't. Okay, in terms of the way ahead, it appears, well, it doesn't appear, we can give managers and leaders mastermind groups. We can use those to ensure improved thought and action leadership. Just the sharing, just the conversation enables a lot of that to take place very easily, very naturally, and individuals grow for themselves in the presence of those conversations. They make friends in the groups, and often those friends are people they will then permit to hold them to account. You said you were going to do this, how's this going, why didn't you do it? And all those sorts of conversations become very productive in stimulating managers and leaders to increase return on investment or productivity and our profits. Or maybe it's about increasing their attention to the social side of the organization, the emotional, the mental health side, and the pastoral side of the organization, because unless your people feel valued and cared for, they're not going to give it their best. And then thirdly, we've got how to leverage existing activities to create improved reputation, results and rewards, because I think much of what we've been through over the last few years is everybody has to do more. And now we're at the stage where the more, okay, we did more, but actually a lot of it is consuming time without giving a good return on investment of that time to anybody. And so often there are very distinct and definite ways to do certain key activities, the master keys, the master maps, to do those things in a much better, more skillful way. And they always deliver results if you've got that problem. So it's not about more work, but it's doing what you're doing differently. From all the work we've done in the 39 years, obviously we've been testing and proving all of this for a good deal of time. And we've been doing that with clients. And the result so far is action by managers and leaders when we evaluated. And also I had the good fortune to work with what was at the time the top predictive analytics company in the world related to learning and development. And that was a fantastic journey. I worked with them for 3 years, fantastic piece of experience. And I learned how to more adequately evaluate and measure. And what came out of that work was in running programs, we began to take master maps. They weren't called that then, but they're called that now. Was an 80, managers and leaders thought they were 80% sustainable. They were more than 80% worthwhile for them and more than 80% worthwhile investment for their organization. So everybody could see a huge amount of gain. Organizations themselves recorded often startling increases in ROI. I remember one organization where we had gone in under the HR director, hidden from view from the, if you like, the board. And they at the time were making a modest, not massive loss, but they were making a loss. And then the following year, they made a profit that was 2.5 times greater than the loss they were making. And it was really interesting for the operations director to say, I'm not sure how that occurred. And what had actually happened is own managers and leaders had actually altered a lot of things across the organization. There were about 100 managers and leaders on the program, and they came out with a completely different and better result. But as we evolved the methodology, what we started to do is to start with an understanding when we work with managers and leaders that the expected minimum return on investment from the time and effort would be a minimum of 400%. And then gradually, as you'll see later, I've got some information about how the REGENESIS system shapes behavior and why it makes a difference. And that 400% figure keeps coming back. And it's interesting that the firm I referred to earlier, Form and Surface Grinding they were called, was 4 times bigger than the average for their sector and their market. And in fact, the Good to Great and the other books that have been carefully researched in the US, and I can't at the moment think of the author, also bring up 6 times or more for the very best. They're often 6 times or more bigger and more profitable, more successful than their peers in their sector. And finally, the ROI across 6-level ROI metrics, and I'll show you what came out of the time with the learning metrics company, the evaluation metrics company, showed managers and teams increased productivity by tens, hundreds, or even, sorry, that's meant to be thousands of percent. It's a typographical error I keep making. I don't know why I do that, but tens, hundreds, or thousands of percent. So we actually have seen productivity increase to that extent in some teams, not all. They're obviously at the top part of the curve, but interesting nonetheless. There's also a little bit about this. In traditional training, this is the Ebbinghaus curve of forgetting, which probably most of you are familiar with. Unless you do something to reinforce the learning that managers can acquire to move from current practice to best practice by way of doing it or repeating certain key activities or certain key messages, the learning is lost in an alarmingly short amount of time. So this is why we've put together the master maps. This is why we're publishing them as a kind of standard reminder, because it keeps the important aspects of an organization to a manager and leaders front of mind, if you like, and stimulates that thought and action leadership. And as I say, it must be reinforced to prevent practice deterioration, because people do forget, and you get practice drift, is what I'm saying. Return on investment as a culture. Well, one of the finest things I guess I've ever realized is normal. The distribution of return on investment in a normal group of people runs like a distribution of anything else in a normal group. And it spreads across 3 standard deviations like this, which is at the top end to the right, you've got 2% who will be definite top performers. You've got 14% who will be probable performers, and you've got 34% who are possible performers. And they're balanced by 34% of possible non-performers, 14% of probable non-performers, and 2% of definite non-performers. And some of that I alluded to earlier. And the ratio of this is 84:16, if you total the numbers. And I just think it's very important, and I want to come back to this in a moment. So that's why we've gone to all this trouble. These have taken probably 28 years to evolve. We've worked so hard on these 12 master maps. So here they all are. And as I said earlier, they are just one page. And they're not everything on the page. What they are is a stimulus, a prompt to look at an area. Am I fully intentionalized? Is my team fully strategized? Have I really individualized my management approach to include the things that Augie was mentioning? Have I really mobilized each individual so that they are objectively and at a felt level for themselves fully energized by the work that they do, by the feedback that we give them? Are we working in as smart a way as possible? Have we systematized our approach? And number 6 is financialized. Have we joined money and activity together so we understand its true value? Often managers don't have access to the numbers that connect their activity to the finances, so they don't realize what does and doesn't make a difference financially for the company. And often they'll be doing things which actually have a cost, but no gain. So, you know, all of these are possibilities. There's also, am I working effectively with the other departments around me and the other teams around me? And are we communicating well so that our words align with our actions? So these are all very, very important areas. And then finally, have we really sorted out our cost of poor quality? Have we really attended to our quality issues throughout? And is there hidden costs, lost opportunities that we cannot see yet? And this really begins to explore that. Have we planned for the future in terms of our people and how we will grow them and how we will attend to that agenda, so that the potential for us to be all that we're capable of being as a human-based organization is really there? Have we looked around our organization? Ideally, in a hologram, the fractals represent a microcosm of the macro image. So is our organization like that? Or are there certain parts which are functioning in a way at odds with the general mission and vision of the organization? And then finally, is there another way of thinking about, is there another way of conceiving of ourselves which could allow us to completely change or upgrade or expand, or those kind of words? So conceptualize all about, are there things to which we're not attending which would open the doors to growth in some way for us as an organization? So those are the 12 maps. And as I said, it's not something appropriate to go much beyond what I've said in this setting, but master maps stimulate thought and action leadership. That's their job. They're not meant to be a source of all knowledge, because that's not possible, but they are meant to draw attention to areas where you might find a real gain by changing the way you do what you already do. If you get involved with a mastermind network group, this is what happens roughly, which is onboarding obviously builds your outcomes, clarifies how you're relating to your organizational priorities, and identifies early gains that you might make as a manager and leader. And in particular, the impact is to raise level of aspiration, prioritize areas of attention, and personalize the approach. We then get into the big piece of work, which is Master Map 1, which is intentionalize. And as you have heard from me, it explores your core aspirations, clarifies your way ahead, and dovetails your personal aspirations with those of the organization. Then in months 1 to 4, you probably move towards more discussion around strategize, and that inevitably involves individualize and energize to build the team and motivate team members and unlock potential. And then as the year goes on, and it's usually around this time that it's probably around about month 8, so systematizes, financialize, mutualize, synchronizes. So it's that group of master maps that's all about the ROI for everyone's activity. Sorry, that's meant to be not removes the friction, but removes the friction in the value creation chain and aligns communication to the most wanted outcomes. Apologies, I got another error there on the slide. And then finally, at around that stage, at the end of that piece of input, groups usually begin to turn upwards, because it's only when they understand more about the outside world that they can see themselves from afar and see their organization from afar and spot the potential that may exist for real transformation in growth. So that's roughly how the relationship goes over time. People may just stay for the 12 months, they may stay beyond. What we're really looking for is the managers and leaders who not only step up to really examine the way they're working, but also to look at maybe mentoring and maybe taking charge of a group and mentoring other managers and leaders. And we've tried to find a mechanism that makes it work for everybody. In terms of the proposal, I guess I'm bringing to BCIC, what I'm really looking for, I don't want this to sound like a salesy thing because that's not where I'm at. What I'm trying to say to you, look, I realize I have to have some numbers here. And what I'd like to do is open conversations with either the chamber or members of the chamber and say, look, we're looking for probably some kind of monthly pricing model. We're willing to put in all our assets. They just become part of the network. And I'm very impressed with Peter Diamantis' 6Ds. And the reason I'm looking up here is I've got them all on the wall here. They're just very useful reminders. And he says that if you have a product that's going forward, you want something that's digitized. So I put an immense amount of effort into digitizing all that we have. And hopefully you'll then end up with an approach, a product, a service, whatever it is, that is deceptive. The market didn't expect this, but it will have a major impact on what matters to people who are the customers and clients, which are managers and leaders, their organizations and their people, I suppose. And some of that effect might be quite disruptive, and maybe new solutions and new ideas will emerge from that. And then out of that, things start to demonetize. And I think that's what I've experienced in the last couple of years, is the need to demonetize what I do and what I've gained from all the work that I've done. So hence we've dropped off any consulting fees, and we just want to do this at an admin cost only type approach and see if we can make that work. We think it's doable, but also I'm at a time in my life when this seems to be a very important piece of my development. And so obviously we started at £1,000 a month, but I'm very happy to talk. I want to know what's a sensible price for India. I really want this to work in the Indian environment, in Indian organizations, and I would see the fee being paid by the organization, and it would trigger the kinds of change that we've been discussing. And as we go forward, I expect this to spread and become dematerialized, is the fifth of the 6 Ds, and then eventually it'll become fully open to the world. It will have spread far enough that this is the standard way that people stimulate their thought and action as managers and leaders, and it becomes democratized. So it's just out there in the world and nobody owns it, nobody controls it, it's just out there. But we will maintain the source material and keep that up to date. So I'll put in mechanisms that will do that in the long term. So that's roughly the thinking. And what's included, a number of you have been asking for that list, and here's that list. Expertly facilitated mastermind groups, and we think 12 is the right number. Open to offers on that if you think it needs to be more to bring the cost down or whatever it is, but we're going with 12 because we think that's the right number. And then that also carries with it the peer mentioned subgroups, the master map and master key professional thoughts and action stimulus, the whole library of that. And we've also got lots of diagnostic tools and needs analysis to identify next actions or the current state of things, so they're also part of that package. We've written a mastermind mentoring manual to provide quick and greater understanding of the maps, but we've also got a lot of video material and lots of deeper support if people want to go into it in more detail. We provide email support that can also turn into phone and Zoom support, and we also think that some kind of membership status might be useful, either to say that I'm taking this approach with my organization or as a manager, just that I'm taking this approach as a manager and leader. Maybe people that become good at using the material become master practitioners, and ultimately we're looking for the natural teachers who can take this on and show it to others and add their own flavour to it, I guess. But really, it's staying with the core materials because we still know all of that works. So that's roughly where we are. How much potential exists? I said I'd come back to this. Why this works is because the REGENESIS, the mastermind, the master map system is a system. And the effect of applying the system to the normal distribution is you can skew the curve. And you can see you don't have to work very hard to skew the curve significantly. Doubling the cost-benefit ratio is not particularly hard if you go systemically across the whole of an organization. Quadrupling is also not that hard. The experience of even big organizations has been huge transformational change in performance when you apply some kind of system that allows knowledge to flow in to managers and leaders and for them to work together. Sorry, I've gone backwards there. And I mentioned tracking return on investment earlier. This is that 6-level model. One of the myths that I certainly broke out of, although I've been evaluating, I think, all of my professional career, there was a myth that you couldn't definitely attach training to return on investment. We now know that is not true, and because of the work of a couple of key players and organizations. So this model has come out of my association with that learning analytics organization. So wider contribution, the story of the change, the business impact, what activities are increased, reduced, and then once you know that, you can usually then, or you can always then get to the value improvement in terms of investment or profit or income and savings or cost reductions, whichever was the goal. And that's enabled by the job impact. What are people doing differently and better together in their jobs? And underneath that is the personal impact. So that goes back to Algi's question, what changes have taken place in capabilities, ideas, intentions of individuals and teams. And finally, sustainability. If people don't like this new way of working, they won't do it. And I think going back to the Great Resignation, we've got our employees quite clearly saying to us, we don't feel recognised, we don't feel that we are able to contribute all that we're capable of doing, and we've got people beginning to try and find another route. I think the work could be done to try and bring them back, and maybe the mastermind groups will be a route where people could be drawn back into the larger organisations which need the expertise and support and commitment to really move forward in the best way possible. Ultimately, what we're looking for is to transform the ramp of contribution, as I call it. Typically, as you can see from those curves on the normal distribution, an organisation will often plateau at around 20% of its potential. It can use traditional training, and the white line above the blue area shows typically a training input or a major program of training can really lift output, but over time, unless you top that up, entropy just erodes that contribution. Things deteriorate, you get practice drift, the people that had the knowledge and had the training move, all of that starts to kick in. And what I'm suggesting here is smart organizations seem to do the equivalent. I mean, this happens to be called REGENESIS because I thought it was a really good word to describe our intent. So you make a REGENESIS intervention, you say, okay, I'm going to try and reform and make sure that the organization continually reforms and has a drive for contribution that is shared and open and participatory. It identifies the very best way we can find of doing a thing. It then mentors other people who've got the same problem or the same activity to do the same thing in the same way, so the top practices are spread. And ultimately we start to build practice communities that communicate with one another, and even employee lifetime protocols that guide their roles, particularly as managers and leaders, but even as team leaders in the organization. There's a huge amount underneath the surface here. It's hard to describe it in this short presentation, but this really, I think, describes the goal. Next steps, and this is where I would like your help. I'd like to be guided as to how I bring this material to you. And I guess the question and discussion I'd like to finish with is, where do you want to go from here? Which of you are willing to come on board to build a REGENESIS mastermind network in India? Who are my collaborating partners? I'd like to know. And if there are those amongst you who would like to do that, please can you just email me. My email will come up at the end of this, or put the messages in chat, and the chamber will collect those and I'm sure forward those to me. And really what are the next steps. So if I can stop there and just open that final piece of discussion, perhaps we can get some ideas and opening. And maybe to hear from some other people, I think it'd be interesting to hear people's views live, if that's possible. I don't know whether that's possible, Augie.
We have some time, so we can take some questions. Is that what you wanted, Thomas, or
Yes,
did I miss?
Yes, definitely. I think it's time for more discussion and Q&A, really.
So KVSSIR asks us, how do you position people with respect to the work they are to do, basis of selection of people for the assignments?
I'm just trying to see how that, when we start working with an individual, we always encourage them to, why we like an organization to pay, even if it's only a little bit, it gets some organizational skin in the game. We prefer that, and therefore the participants in the mentoring group feels beholden to their employer who is paying for the experience. So therein is the start of the joint, and we send a person off to go find the connect that they need in order to do the first 4 maps. So there's safety in that, so that we don't have the development, the personal development, wandering away from the organization that's paying. It crops up in the first master map, which is all about development of self, and it crops up again more strongly in the second master map, which is the team building. Because ideally, in organization team building, you have the manager's manager, or even the manager's manager's manager present for part of that team building session. So you're anchoring it in, and everything gets joined together more fully. We also need the individual to maybe go and find out what the organization's mission is, or their wider department's mission is. So we do make sure that it is properly joined together. I hope that answers the question.
Sure, thank you. I think I'll go to the last question, which is from Dr. V. Padmaja. How has digitization impacted behavior of employees at workplace, although there's an enhancement in performance? I think this is a question which not just Thomas, but a lot of others who have introduced digitization in their organizations can quickly revert to. Padmaja.
I think there is hope and fear in about equal measure. I think it's slightly at this time on the side of hope. I had it very well described to me by a chief executive of a car plant a couple of days ago, who said, I either see the most wonderful things that might be possible, might emerge in the future. We all have richer lives, better communication and better guidance, or we face a dystopian hell, or a mix of the two. And I'm not sure which way it is going. But in terms of impacts on employees, not much, some of what we're currently doing seems to be somewhat dehumanizing. It's taken the enjoyable elements out of a task and given it to a machine because we can. And just because we can doesn't mean we should. And that's why I've come to India first, because I know that question will matter. And I know there's enough collective conscience to get hold of that at a senior level. So that's why I've come. That's why I'm here.
Thank you, Thomas. Welcome. Does anyone want to add to that answer or give your perspective to Dr. Padmaja's question? Okay. All right. So with that, we had a good participation of more than 45 folks who had joined us. And yes, we are past 1 o'clock. Probably lunch was calling. So we've lost some of our friends, but nevertheless, I think what you did, Thomas, was help us rethink and turn traditional thoughts about leadership and management on its head, and see how we could equip ourselves for the new ways of working. and the new ways of working is as we move towards massive digitization and also managing with empathy and compassion and being adaptable to further tsunamis, God forbid, if they happen, like the pandemic. But basically, for us to be resilient and adapt to changing models, I think your mastermind series has been very well thought about. And I'm sure India as a market needs something as refreshing as this. Like I said, we need to turn the traditional models of leadership out on its head, and you've given us thought for it. And I'm sure a lot of our members are energized, and now they're also thinking, and we will certainly come back to you. So thank you so much for all your effort, time, and content that you have shared. But before I hand it over to a vote of thanks, one call out is for Naresh of USIS, who helped also get this program organized for us here, apart from Rupa from the Secretariat. But I'm not going to go through a list of names because we have our immediate past president, Mr. Ahmed Ali, and he is also a very senior and seasoned HR leader, and he is also the chairman of Cornucopia Consulting, to do the honors and say the word of thanks. Thank you, Mr. Ahmed Ali.
Thank you, Augustus. It's a privilege to do this because when generally BCIC Secretariat knows that there are so many seminars and webinars happening. I don't even open them. But when I saw this particular topic, REGENESIS, I was wondering what it is going to be. It's totally new. In today's atmosphere, with this COVID and post-COVID, we're all confused. I run a consulting company, and I've been holding leadership positions in HR for big companies, but there was a certain pattern of, how to manage human resources, right? Now it's completely getting disrupted. So I think in that atmosphere, you coming and sharing your thoughts on this was really, really, interesting. We are all looking for opportunities and to learn new things, how to manage people. Many organizations today, I believe, have got a WhatsApp groups going on, right? And they keep employees engaged through WhatsApp groups, digital means of doing it. Medical reps, I worked all my life in the pharmaceutical industry. Medical reps converse with the doctors using digital thoughts. And this leadership and management has always been an issue in the past, but you have brought in some new perspective, Thomas. Thank you for it, and I think we must thank Augustus for bringing you to this forum and sharing your thoughts. We really gained a lot from it, and I'm sure I will also try and get in touch through Augustus with you as to how we can use this for our organizations, right? Thank you, and thank you all the participants. Yes, it has been a long session, from 11:30 till almost 1:15, 1:30. So, but nevertheless, the interest was sustained, and most of the participants remained in the group listening to you. So, thank you again, Thomas, and look forward to our next interaction whenever that be. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor and a privilege for me. I've really thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Thomas.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody, all the participants. Bye-bye, the Secretariat. Thank you very much for organizing it as well. Bye-bye.
Thank you.